And today we are continuing our series entitled Deep Clean. And I hope that as we launched this series a few weeks ago, and I talked to us as a faith community, that this summer, as your pastor, I just really want us to move slowly through the summer. So for July and August, and I mean slowly in a lot of ways. I hope we rest. I hope that we have great times of renewal with in our relationship with God, but with friends and family as well. But I want us to pause this summer, as I said a few weeks ago, and I really want us to pay attention to what's going on in our hearts, in our souls. What is happening as we engage this world, as we continue to move, as we transition more and more and moving away from COVID. I had a conversation with a couple. Yeah, we were here before COVID, and they're back again. And like this, we continue to move on. But there was a lot. I believe there was a lot that happened to us and in us in the last few years. And I really want us, before we get busy again in September and start moving and getting school and work and everything else, I want us to take this summer and pay attention to what's going on in our hearts. What are the things that we need to address, that we need to bring to God, that we need to bring to the Holy Spirit and say, okay, this is here. Help me get clean. Help my heart be pure before you. Kevin talked last week about shame, and if you've missed any of these messages, I would encourage you to follow us on YouTube, and they're always posted later in the week. And today, Jen is coming, and she's going to be continuing the series and taking us into another aspect of our hearts, of where we need to pay attention as we continue this series of Deep Clean.
It's your breath in our lungs. And I hope the breath in my lungs this morning will honor God in everything I say and do. We're in the series of Deep Clean. And I mean, don't we all need a little bit of a deep clean sometimes? The theme verse for the series is, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. And there's some versions that say, for the wellspring of life flows from it. And I love that picture, because when you see a spring of life, you think, wow, our heart, everything flows from our hearts. So it is important that we guard our hearts. I used to use this verse on my kids all the time when they would get angry with each other, or they'd go to places they might be, as teenagers, I'm just like, guard your heart when you go out tonight. And so it's come back to bite me, because my 22-year-old fine young man, he will often say when I'm getting a little rattled at home, he'll be like, guard your heart, Mom, guard your heart. So, we have this fabulous plant in our front yard. And it's so fabulous, and I love it for so many reasons. But I love it because I can completely ignore it, and it looks this beautiful. Every year, in about August or September, it blooms. I never water it. I don't do anything to it. And it always looks gorgeous every year. But as homeowners, we have decided that the plant is very large, and in the way, our steps are rotten, and we need to just move it around. So we have decided it's best for the plant to be moved. Well, the plant's not big on being moved at this point. So we had a friend's excavator, and we dug it out this week. And we thought we had a great new place for the plant to be planted. And so as homeowners, we have the control to change the location of our plant. So we put it in this new location, and in order to do that, my sister-in-law, who's super green thumb, said, you gotta have really good soil. It's not gonna like this, it's not gonna like this. So I bought 5 bags of triple mix, and I'm all ready to plant this plant. We dug a big hole, and I even put water in it because I remember my mother doing that when she was replanting things. And I put all this triple mix in the hole, so it's really good soil. And then we covered it all up, and then the next day, it was like really wilty. 24 hours, it was completely like looking really bad. And then I was talking to my mother-in-law, thank goodness, and she said, you gotta water it. Like, you gotta water it for an hour with your hose every single day for at least a week. And I'm like, I never touched this plant before, and it was beautiful. And now I gotta water it like for an hour every day in order to help this plant survive my great idea that it needs a new home. So, I don't know how the plant's going to survive. But my point is that I'm at a time in my life when, like, I think I looked like this plant. Like, I had such a great upbringing, and I mean, everything was pretty peachy in my life. And if you know me, I'm a bit off, but I'm a bit I have ideas about everything, and I had an idea about what my life should look like. And it was really looking pretty good, and I kind of didn't have to do a lot. I mean, I had a good home and everything. Like, I didn't have any sort of adversity, really, in big amounts of adversity. So it looked great, and it didn't take a lot of maintenance. And then this picture of this white picket fence and the person that I was going to share this white picket fence with, like, it all started to crumble. And I started looking like this. I had a huge hit of rejection. I felt like, I mean, I had the script written for my life, and it wasn't going as I had written, and my plant was very wilted. And so I had some decisions to make in my life. And when I look back, because, you know, when you look back, your vision's 2020, I realized that I needed a very harsh uprooting in order to transplant me to Bancroft. And the white picket fence, I'm sure it would have been good, but God had so much more for me than a white picket fence and a perfect little world with no adversity. And so I was uprooted harshly, and it hurt. And I don't wish it on anybody, but I can truly say, when I look back, that it was probably the best thing that ever happened to me. Today, we are talking about when God doesn't make sense. And this is a sensitive topic. And when I share this morning, I want you to know that there is no judgment as to where you are in life. In this room, I can be pretty confident that some big stuff has happened to people. And I don't want to ever undermine what you're going through or what you have gone through, and I don't want you to go away with a thought that I said, just get over it. So I want to be super sensitive because it's a super hard topic. And I'm not sure why Steve gave it to me, actually. But we are going to talk about what happens when God doesn't make sense. And when we have this struggle within us that keeps us from that wellspring of life called bitterness. Right? So we're going to start in a book that is a small little book, 4 chapters in the Old Testament. Some of you might be really familiar with the story, some of you might not. But we're just going to read a few verses from it. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in a country of Moab. Now, Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died. Now, I read some stuff. I think he died at the hand of the king, but I'm not a theologian. You should ask Sean after, because he might know. Now, Elimelech, he died, and she was left with her 2 sons. Now, because her sons and her were in Moab, they married Moabite women. One was Orpah, not Oprah, Orpah, and one was Ruth. After they had lived there for 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, So no, Naomi is left completely alone without her sons, without her husband. Now that's horrible in any culture, but that's really horrible in this culture. She has very few options. Her options are slavery, prostitution, or begging in order to survive. So this is devastation. She has no other choice but then to decide to go home to her homeland, which was Bethlehem. So she tells her daughters, go back to your families, go back to your mother's home and leave me alone. I'm going to go back to Bethlehem by myself. So the one daughter, Orpah, wanted to start her new talk show, so she went back to Moab. But Ruth said, no, I want to go with you, Naomi. No, Naomi tried to push her to go back to her home, and Ruth said no. And this is a common quote that we use. Where I go, you go. Your God is going to be my God. Ruth refused to leave Naomi alone. Her commitment to not leave Naomi had incredible impact on all of us, actually, as you'll find out eventually. But the commitment to not leave her was huge. So the two women went on until they came to Bethlehem. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. The women explained, can this be Naomi? And it wasn't like, wow, look at Naomi after all these years. No, it was like, I don't even recognize this woman. And Naomi's response was, do not call me Naomi. The meaning of Naomi was pleasant and sweet. And she said, don't call me by that name. She said, call me Mara. The meaning of the word Mara is bitter. So Naomi was like, I don't even want to be my name anymore. That's how devastated she was. Call me Mara. Call me bitter. Because the Almighty has made my life bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. She went away full and she came back empty. Have you ever went away full in life and came back empty? Maybe you went down the aisle full and 5, 10, 20 years later, you came back empty. Maybe you went to university full, great aspirations for what your career is going to look like, and the first year was a disaster and you came back empty. Maybe you had a dream as a child of a white picket fence and you came back empty. God, I put my trust in you. I have deep faith. And this is what you gave me? Seriously? I was full and now I'm empty. That's where Naomi was at. Why do we blame? And I bet you guys have great answers for this. I've come up with a few. I know it's not exhaustive. Sometimes we blame ourselves. We blame our friends. We blame whoever offended us. We blame God. And again, please hear me when I say, I know there's big stuff out there, but here's just a few ideas for the average sort of things that happen in our life that make us resentful and bitter. You know what we do when we blame? We kind of lessen our own personal responsibility. You know what? It kind of gives us a sense of superiority. Like, I was right and you were wrong. It protects our ego. It feeds our need to control. This is a little bit of a tricky one that you might have to think about a little bit, and I'm still thinking about it, so I'm not sure if I can explain it. But we didn't have control in the situation that you screwed up. And that's why it happened. We wouldn't have control if we allowed the other person to tell their part of the story. So we struggle with that as well. Because if we open ourselves up to hear another side of the story, we don't have control of the words the person's going to say. We blame to protect our hurt. We push people away. We lose healthy community. In our story, Naomi lost that healthy community. We find temporary safety in isolation. And you know what? We all need time to lick our wounds. So that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about years and years of isolating ourselves because we're protecting our hurt. And you know what? We don't isolate ourselves just from each other in this necessarily. We isolate ourselves also from God in a lot of these situations. Okay, why did God have such an issue with Naomi being in Moab? This not-so-friendly creature was the god of Moab. His name was Shemash. And if you could describe Moab maybe as like the armpit of the earth, Moab was a terrible area. It was the enemy's territory. In Psalm 60 verse 8, Moab was described as the wash basin. And that doesn't mean much in our culture, but in that culture, people walked with sandals, dirty feet, and every home had a wash basin. You washed your feet before you entered a home. Moab was the wash basin of the earth. It wasn't a good place. Naomi spent 10 years there after her husband died in not a good place, in the wash basin of the earth. Shemash was a god. His name meant destroyer, and he demanded blood sacrifice, including sacrificing children. Shemash was dark. Moab was dark. Naomi was there for 10 years. When we are in the wrong direction always leads us to the wrong destination. Naomi was looking for God's blessing, but it wasn't in Moab. God's blessing was in Bethlehem. You know, our GPSs drive me crazy. When you're going, and I'm going to refer to Bancroft because it's a little bit different in the city, and you're going down the wrong road and it says recalculating. And now when you're in Hardwood Lake, the road you took doesn't have like another street and a block that it can recalculate for you. It just keeps saying recalculating. And when you're wanting to go to Denby and you took the wrong turn at Hardwood Lake, and it keeps saying recalculating, what do you need to do? You need to stop the car, turn it around, and go the other way. And I often, and this isn't theology, probably, it's just my vision of what works for me. But I see life as a sort of main road. And God is everywhere, and I know that, so don't judge me for theology here for a second. I see life as a main road, and we have these side roads that we get tempted to go down. And we might take a side road and get distracted with whatever, you know what distracts you. And it's not necessarily in the direction that God has us, but it's a side road that we're taking. And we might be bitter in this side road, and we might be angry. But we're still praying, and we're doing our devotions every morning, and we're trying to find Jesus in the side road. And we're praying for peace, and we're praying for joy. But we're not willing to give up the bitterness in our hearts. And there's a verse that's so sobering to me. And again, I'm not saying this in judgment, but the verse is challenging, and it says, where there is hatred, there isn't, like God isn't there. And I know God's everywhere, but there's a verse that says, if we don't have love, we don't have God. And so these side roads that we take in life, they're ruining the wellspring of joy in us. And we're looking for joy and we're praying for joy, but we're not willing to give up that bitterness in our hearts. We're just hoping that maybe God will just give us peace and joy anyway. And he's back on the main road going, hello, come back to me. Recalculating. What holds us to bitterness this morning? We all have it. This is a universal issue. You can go anywhere in the world and people will have a different word for it, but we will all be able to relate to bitterness. A distorted view of God always leads us to a distorted view of life. You know the verse that we just talked about with Naomi, where she said, I am bitter. God's done me wrong. That was destroying her view of life, her distorted view of God. What blame game are you stuck in this morning? Naomi blamed God, and yet she stayed in Moab for 10 years. She started to change when she started to realize one thing. So what are signs of distorted thinking this morning? What are some signs that we might have in all of us? So don't sleep through this, because this is for all of us. Signs of bitterness or distorted thinking that we might have. How about sarcasm? I can be super sarcastic, but how about sarcasm that's really cutting, and it actually, addresses issues. It might address people groups, and we're sarcastic. What is the root of that? How about struggling the success of others? I struggled to celebrate the success of others this week. God has such a sense of humor, because I was talking about this, and then, wow. I struggled to celebrate the success of others this week. Man. How about lack of concern for others or the ability to see other people's needs? We really just see our own pain. We don't see anything else. We are completely sidetracked by our own stuff. How about easily offended? We're a little bit brittle, and when we bump up against other people, the corners get bruised and sometimes fall off. We're a little bit crusty. How about making up conversations in your mind? Have you made up conversations in your mind? Oh my word. Our minds are completely not healthy sometimes. We make up conversations about what could have happened, should have happened, what you said, how they said it, what they meant when you didn't ask them what they meant. You just thought what they meant. We make up conversations in our mind that are toxic, they're infectious, they're a cancer, and it's destroying the wellspring of life in us. How about feeling like others are out to get you? You walk in a room, two people stop talking, and you're like, they were talking about me. I think they were talking about me. Distorted thinking, distorted thinking. Negative, like you're really nice when you say, hey, how are you this morning? But if you went out for a coffee, wow, negativity. A lot of negativity. Rumination over the events, again and again, over in our head. And this is just a small list of distorted thinking. We're isolating ourselves from people and God. The pathways are hardening our heart. The Lord's Prayer is a template for us. And I don't think we need to be religious about the Lord's Prayer. But there's some words in there that we can use as a template for our lives. And the one that is, again, so sobering is forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. Whoa. God asks us to forgive our debtors in order to receive his forgiveness. That sobers me greatly. Isolation and avoidance. So, the two women went into Bethlehem. We read this part. But the part I want you to see right now is the word Almighty. What does the word Almighty mean? You know, there was just this little hidden sign that Naomi had faith in her bitterness. Because she could have called, God, the guy upstairs, the universe, the man in the sky, whatever these terms are that are kind of lax. But she called God Almighty, which means there was still faith there. There was still something in her that acknowledged the sovereignty of God. She made two mistakes. She left Bethlehem and she blamed God. But the one thing she got right was what she called God, the name she called God. There is hope for Naomi. The word Almighty is Shaddai. Ample, adequate, enough. And when you put L in front of Shaddai, it refers to God. God is ample, adequate, and enough. God is exactly what you need when you need it. So so Ruth takes some action. In her bitterness, there is a little niggly of hope. She has a concept that God is ample, adequate, and enough. Even if she didn't really acknowledge it in her bitterness, she acknowledged it by the word that she described God as. Naomi takes action after she leaves her homeland. She sets her daughter-in-law up with her cousin. And again, in that day and age, women were not allowed to own land, so they needed a kinsman redeemer, a next of kin, to marry into the family in order to keep their assets. So Ruth has her cousin, and he's rich, he's kind, and he's godly. Hello, that's like good husband material. He sets her up with Naomi, her daughter-in-law. So Boaz took Ruth, and I believe it was Ruth that proposed to Boaz, which is kind of cool too. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. When he made love to her, the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. The woman said to Naomi, "Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer." Again, that's a cultural thing that happened for widows. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life, sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loved you, who was committed to you, who is better than 7 sons, gave birth to Obed, this small baby. This baby, there was hope in the life of this baby. Ruth was better than 7 sons because Ruth had the ability to have offspring for Naomi. That Naomi took this child in her arms, carried him. The woman that lived there said, "Naomi has a son," and they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. In that whole genealogy, and again, you need to talk to Sean after, because I don't do a lot of theology, but there is a whole genealogy, of the line of descendants from Boaz to all kinds of people, the father of, and there's a blank because there's a whole lot of fathers of, to Heli, who was the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, and Mary was the mother of Jesus, who was the Messiah. Naomi's bitter situation of hopelessness and devastation turned into Jesus, the Messiah. Maybe you feel like you are stuck in Moab, somewhere in your life. Maybe God is calling you to Bethlehem. He's saying, "Hello, I'm here on the main road," and you're off on the side road in Hardwood Lake somewhere, going nowhere, right? A dead end. He's calling us back to that main road. What's your Moab this morning? There are people in this community who have experienced great loss. And they are turning their worst nightmares, a script they would never write for themselves, their worst nightmares, they are turning into situations that they are bringing awareness, they're bringing maybe funds, they're helping people become aware of circumstances. There are so many amazing things happening. And again, I say that with great sensitivity. God wants to bring you back to Bethlehem and give you purpose and give you meaning. He wants to turn the greatest test in your life into like a testimony, a story of how God works and redeems and renews and makes those wilted leaves turn into beautiful hydrangea flowers. Take time to observe your bitterness this morning. Where's it coming from? Where's the root? When we pulled out that hydrangea plant, there was all, a normal set of roots, and then there was this like big long root that was like as tall as the plant itself. Is there a big long root of bitterness in your life this morning? I don't know, and it's not for any of us to judge. I know I have constantly have to be on top of and aware of my thinking and my mind in this area. What's at stake if we don't do this? If we don't listen and observe, what is at stake? Is it your kids? Do your kids get to be the recipients of your negativity? What's at stake this morning if you don't address this? Is it your peace? Is it your joy? Perhaps there's a need for a perspective shift this morning. A letting go of expectations and expectations that you had of somebody at some point and they disappointed you. Are you willing to continue to allow them to interrupt the wellspring of life in you? God is El Shaddai. He is exactly what you need when you need it. But it requires trust. Can we trust in a sovereign God? But here's the thing. Sometimes we can trust in the sovereign God, but we have a really hard time, if we're really honest, believing that He's good, because it doesn't feel good in the moment. Can we accept in our trust, because I don't think we can trust without this, can we accept that we may never get the answer this side of heaven? We may never get the answer for why things had to happen to us. But what is our alternative to trust? Do we bear the load alone? Sit in our negativity, in our bitterness? What's the alternative? Can we trust that God is sovereign, that He knows and has control of everything, and that He is good? Even when things don't make sense. When God is all you have, you might realize that God is all you need.